We're good to go. I'm Natalia, CEO with Codility. I will have a pleasure to speak today to Ananta and Farhan, fantastic VPs of engineering in great places. And what we're going to talk about is how you're maintaining a high morale, inclusive culture pretty much throughout these unprecedented times. So let's do a quick round of introduction. What do we do at our places? A little bit about Codility. So Codility is a platform for right now also remote, of course, technical assessments and hiring at scale. So we help companies globally scale their engineering teams also remotely right now. Over to you.
Farhan, you are muted, I think.
There we go. Sorry. There you go. Remote rule number 1 broken already. All right. So my name's Farhan Thawer. I'm currently VP Engineering at Shopify. I've worked at large companies and small, and my last company, Helpful, was acquired by Shopify in 2019. So nice to see everybody here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ananta Kancharla. I'm a VP of Engineering at Lyft. So out here at Lyft, so I manage the software team that is building the software for the self-driving car. So like Farhan, prior to this, actually I got a great chance to work with him in my prior life, like when I was at Facebook and he was at Pivotal. But like him, I've had the fortune of working in some really iconic companies before this.
Okay, so pretty much let's dive straight in. How was morale throughout in your teams and across the organization throughout these times? We're all navigating a pandemic. We're all navigating a global crisis. So did you notice any fluctuations in morale, any highs, any lows, and how do you take your teams through these times?
Yes. Do you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I can go, and then maybe we can just figure out who's going first next. Yeah, so basically, it was very interesting in the sense that, now when I look back, it feels like a very, very different time in the beginning. And what is interesting is that I happened to be on a panel discussion similar to this, talking about dealing with a crisis at the time. And I actually had prepared for that, and I have notes for that. So I was just going, before this, I was reading those notes to see, what it felt like back then and what it felt like, what it's feeling like now. And it's been fascinating. So at the time, it felt like a giant tsunami coming in, sweeping people down. So it was interesting in terms of two things. It was deep, meaning there were many layers of uncertainty and fear. And it was very fast moving. Things were changing really, really fast. Now, when I fast forward to this time, it's very different. It feels like a long grind, and there is all this blurring going on between work at home and just homework and kids at home, and basically mostly the things are the same, but nobody knows when this is ending fully. So it definitely there's been a big change in how this has been perceived, the perception of the stress.
Sure. So I can go next. I think the way we've thought about it at Shopify is at the beginning, it has definitely impacted everybody. I think that's the first thing to acknowledge. I don't think there was anybody who was unaffected. It doesn't matter what your family situation, probably the pandemic has some impact. And I think the one thing we try to get across to everybody is that try to figure out what this means for you in the new normal. And we use the airline analogy a lot, right? Which is that please put your mask on first before trying to help others. So a lot of people started trying to figure out, how do I help my team? How do I help this person over here? The first thing to figure out is, what does it mean for you? And how do you make sure that you can get to a state where then you can help other people? I think that's the first thing. And then I think as a company, we started to figure out that, because of the demands of what's changing so fast, and I agree with Ananta that everything's changing quickly, and even now things are still changing. We're trying to figure out when we go back, is it a second wave, what's happening? That, we try to give people the space and time to reflect on their own situation. And so at Shopify, for example, we gave every Friday off for a quarter, I think 13 Fridays. So, and we encourage people not to work, not to be online. And we said, take it for yourself. Take the day off completely off and have a long weekend every week to try to figure out how we're going to move forward. And then lastly, I think one of the things we try to do is lean into any uncertainty, because there's uncertainty everywhere. When are we going back? What's happening with the office? What does remote work mean? I didn't sign up for this. What about recruiting, onboarding? Like, there's so many questions. And so when there were things that we thought we could reduce uncertainty around, we tried to lean into those. So for example, with remote work, we just said, you know what? We don't know how long we're going to be in this, and the world's probably not going to be the same as when we got into the pandemic. So let's just fully embrace remote and remove the uncertainty around, you know, it's cool that you're typing from your bed or an ironing board as your desk, but instead, why don't we give people money to redo their office and let them expand internet connections and really lean into remote. And then when things open up with new information, we can figure out what that means.
Yeah, so it's actually a very similar thing that we had to do. So in fact, it was almost like 3 phases in which we dealt with all this crisis. That was first phase was like really just stabilize and survive, right? So you just use the tsunami crisis, you know, just cling on to any tree that you can grab and just stay. But practically what it meant was like dealing with the emotional side of people. So we tried to stay connected and make sure that like they are confident, like, you know, we generally things are going right. Or at least like we are also facing the same problem. I think similar to like what Farhan was saying. The second phase was very interesting, and it was actually quite a lot of fun. Like, so in many ways, like I just kind of termed it as like playing defense. So this is basically what it practically means is adjusting. How am I going to deal with this? So in fact, in my team, I remember we came up with like 3 specific things that we wanted to do. Like basically we said, how do you get your work done without driving on the road? How do you get work done without proximity to the hardware? And so we kind of came up with goals, and then we asked everybody to think about it. So the team rallied. It was like pretty fun. Like everybody like contributed to that. Then I would say what we are in is the phase 3. This is basically like, you know, you could call it playing offense. Now, how do you do this in a sustainable way for a long time? And what does it mean to capitalize? Again, going to some of the things that Shopify did, how do you capitalize on some of these crises? You know, like Rahm Emanuel's quote, like never let a good crisis go to waste. But how do you kind of capitalize on that and build up on that? And so it's been great, similar things, you know, giving people time off, much better tooling, batching days off. Like we decided to kind of give people like chunks of days off. And that's been helpful because they know like for a period, like there is certainty, like they're not doing anything. And improving the documentation, you know, like collaboration, all of which are problematic. So yeah, so those were kind of the 3 phases we went through, and the phase 3 is still developing. So I'm going to keep these notes. So next time I have to give another conference, you know, I'll use these.
Yeah, I like what you said around the product, because you know, we looked at that next and said everything we did from a planning perspective should just go in the garbage, and we should start over product planning for 2020, and that is what we did. Yeah. And we tried to figure out what does it mean for our customers. So similar with Lyft, right? I'm sure everything changes when the pandemic hits, and same with Shopify. And so we said, well, what are the things that we can do to help our merchants today versus a quarter or a year from now? Because we usually think about the very long term because we want to be, you know, a 100-year company. We have that motto we say all the time. But the pandemic is something that has to be reckoned with in a quarter or a month or a week from now. So we really focused on what we can change in from a product roadmap perspective very, very quickly and early to help those, in our case, merchants, have a good landing experience if we could help them in the pandemic.
So we had a very similar experience with our product. So pretty much all our customers overnight had to move all their on-site engineering interviews to remote space. So we were there also. Of course, we rebuilt our roadmap to support that on the pretty much on the go. So probably a fastest shipped features in our history.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one of the things we've seen around employees is that because of the pandemic, and you have to be careful of this, some people are just working way more because there's nothing else to do, right? Like you can't go out for dinner, you can't go to the movies, you can't travel for vacation. So we had to kind of track and say, hey, are people actually taking Friday off? Are they taking enough rest time? I think the other thing is because of the kids situation is to be flexible, right? So for me, you know, for a long time, even now, I basically work like 7 to 9 a.m. and then I take a break from 9 to 12 so I can be with my kids and help them with their online schooling, and then sometimes even till 1, and then I work from like 1 to 6 p.m. So working with your team to help them come up with creative things such that you can say, hey, how do we still get our stuff done? And then letting people know, hey, you know what? You might not get everything done. That's totally fine. And it's fine to see your dog in the frame or your kids running in. It's going to happen. Everybody, I mean, now we look forward to those things. But
yeah, actually, that is actually, I would say, one of the more endearing parts of working from home. Suddenly a dog shows up or a cat shows up on your keyboard, and or not mine. We have a dog, and suddenly makes a big difference to the whole meeting. And so these things have been, genuinely good at like connecting us.
Yeah,
it's definitely that we see our teams that are able to bring their fuller self to work, right? Mm-hmm. Right now, in this situation.
Yeah, and I think you're one of the things we haven't mentioned, but I think is something we should talk about, is maintaining those connections with employees. Like, one thing that you may have done in the past is you might run into people in the hallway or at lunch, or maybe when I would see people on the plane all the time for Shopify, whether going to Ottawa or San Francisco, and now you're not going to do that. So I think we definitely saw more of leadership and leaders, more town halls, more video one-on-ones, using remote tools to do virtual coffees and things like that, I think increased. And in many ways, I think we're able to have a tighter connection with folks that maybe you didn't have something in your calendar like once a month to connect with somebody over video, because you usually just saw them in the hallway.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like we've also learned a whole sort of new skills people have. So because at the end of the day, we were doing all these like socials, and quite often the content for the socials were the team themselves. Like, so we had opera singers and DJs and all kinds of interesting fun parties, and in fact we could scale our parties for a lot more, because quite often what would happen is when we did that at normal times, people would go back home and on a Friday evening or something like that. But now you're at home and you bring your family into it. So it's been, some of the adjustments I have to say have been a lot more fun and productive.
Actually, speaking about supporting our teams, one of the things I realized relatively quickly, and a lot of people that I spoke with have had similar experiences or so similar things in their companies, that actually the biggest I would say the biggest burden of transitioning the team to remote settings throughout this crisis was and is on middle managers, because that suddenly becomes your microcosm for a team, right? So you don't rely on an office anymore. You have less serendipity as well. How are you supporting your managers, and what can middle managers, engineering managers, direct managers do to support their teams?
Yeah, I think that burnout with the actually, I was just reading an article in New York Times. Basically, they were defining what burnout means, and it kind of resonated. Basically, they were saying that like burnout occurs when the distance between the ideal and the possible and then the possible lived reality is too big. It's too much to bear. So basically, managers get hit hard a lot because, and actually, we've been doing like these quarterly surveys to kind of keep tab on like how everybody's been feeling. And it's very clear through the surveys that the managers are the ones who are indicating that they're feeling more burnt out. So it's like data bears it out. Because they have more senior you are, or more people you are responsible for, so the more burden rested on you, and therefore like there was more burnout. So yeah, I think we had the same kind of idea. We were using liberally the same airlines philosophy of putting on your own oxygen mask first, and because only if you take care of yourself, you're fit to lead. Otherwise, you're going to be like hard pressed. So a lot of the things that we already talked about, definitely like online socials. Another thing that worked was like socially distant backyard gatherings. So then we've had like exchanging ideas through the like, how are you dealing with this these unprecedented times? We also exchanged meals. We had like a meal exchange program somebody devised. They came up with a cool matching algorithm with preferences. Another thing that was useful here was like 15% of the meeting time, let's say, you would dedicate it in the beginning or maybe in the end to be just simply talking about the situation and not about the work. And that was useful when people kind of got to open up and talk about, especially if the leaders are vulnerable. So then everybody kind of feels, yeah, I'm not in this alone. Everybody's got the same problems. So those kind of things definitely helped.
Yeah, no, I really like those. I think there's a few things we did at Shopify that I think were useful, and we're still all learning. I think there's a lot more we could do. One of the things was I mentioned earlier, which is more visibility from leadership. So for the first, I think maybe 4 months or so, every town hall was Toby, like the CEO, doing an AMA. Like no agenda, just AMA every single week. And it was amazing because it just, you know, you have some kind of voting mechanism. So the top questions always came to the top. And he was there to answer, like, what does it mean? What are we thinking about this? And he would say, I don't know yet. We don't know what we're doing yet. But it was a very good way to like really feel connected to the leadership. And of course, he'd bring in other special guests. So it wasn't just him. I thought that was really endearing and something that we tried to copy in other parts of the organization. I think the second thing we tried to do was replicate some of the things that we had in the office. So we actually had like a hack days, and somebody created an app called Corridor, which is like you just go into Corridor and it just randomly matches you with someone over video. Like if you're in a corridor, so it's like I want to take a break from my meeting, or I end my meeting 5 minutes early, or jump in a corridor and you can just run into somebody in the hallway basically. And it was a really cool idea that allowed you to learn about somebody else, but also something that may have been only you'd see people in your office or on your floor. Now you'll just see anybody in the company. So I thought that was good. And I like the socially distant walks. I've been doing them actually more with candidates in a weird way, because they'll never see the office maybe and never meet anybody. And so it is strange for them to kind of join a company without knowing. And so I would do the socially distant walk. And I think that, you know, one of the jokes I had is I just hired a director of engineering, and somebody asked me where he lived. And I said, I don't know. I actually hired somebody who I don't know what city. I know what country. I know he's in the US, but I don't know what city he lives in. And so it's so strange that I don't know how tall he is either. But what's interesting about that is that we've used the, you know, things that may have been a signal before, right? Because you get to know somebody in person, you have to replicate over maybe a tool like Codility or other types of video. And I think it does open up, like constraints bring creativity. So it allows you to do things that you maybe would not have done in the past. Maybe I would not have looked for a director of engineering in the US in the past. Maybe I would have just narrowed it to Toronto, for example.
Yeah, you guys should open those corridors. Sounds like chat roulette internal.
Yeah, and so that's a better name for it. We do call that chat. We do call it chat roulette, but it's called Corridor. But it is that same idea of it's synchronous. So synchronous, but random connections between people. And then we also have a different version of it called the Shopify Lounge, which is you can see everybody, you can't hear everybody, and you can kind of jump into different conversations. So there's a bunch of these hackathon tools that around collaboration that we've messed around with. And the last one also is VR. So we've been messing around with a lot of stuff in VR, and we've got some internal hackathons going where you can jump and go like fishing with somebody or sit on a canoe and paddle around. I've done some one-on-ones where I'm swimming with my direct report in VR.
Pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you're already very prepared to remain remote for a long time. Is that the plan for you? And how are you thinking about office, remote, distributed, all the setup? And something that I can share from what we've learned when we surveyed engineers globally. We did that pre-COVID and post-COVID, and actually during COVID. So pre-COVID, a majority of engineers either were already working remotely or really wanted to try working remotely or more flexibly. And right now, we also know that 76% of engineers that are working remotely, they love it. They really want to keep it. They don't want to come back to noisy offices with an open space plan. How are you thinking about the future for yourselves and for your teams?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can do. Yeah, I think remote work is totally doable, because if you can build a self-driving car remotely, and we've been able to like expand where we run like remotely, building a fast solution should be like pretty easy. You should be able to do a lot of things remotely. A lot of things have gotten better as a result. Like, so for example, we have teams in London and Munich, which used to always complain about the disparity in the information flow. So now they say that, like, this has been a great leveler. So everybody has been able to have similar things, because like just communication gets better, documentation got better. And the other interesting thing is, we also talked about new and better tools, including the hackathon tools like they built, which is very cool. And the other interesting thing is, like, when you're working in this tiny window that you have, so it's very easy like to step back and see the big picture a lot more often. makes you think about that. But there are downsides, and there are no two ways about it. Like, so there's a lot of interesting ideas come from serendipitous conversations and meetings. And we have obviously less of these. And we still don't have full high fidelity communication, right? Till the day AR and VR completely solve these problems, we still need some physical contact, and ergo, socially distanced walking. So there are some challenges, and I would say we have not, unlike Shopify, we have not embraced it fully in saying like, okay, there will be no more offices, because the nature of the business also warrants like people, we have like hubs and service centers and places like that. So we probably will not do something drastic like that. But on the other hand, like I think it's been very easy to hire people remotely, like kind of what like Farhan did. You hire people in like remote locations, and it really doesn't matter. And in the past, like we used to be far more strict about like who gets to work remotely. But now that like you can see, we would say like, oh yeah, they need to be like a very, very senior level, and only then we'll allow, and they have to have experience. But now we've seen like, junior entry-level engineers do that. So all of those things have gotten a lot more relaxed.
Yeah, I think that you hit on some interesting points there. I think not everyone has to figure this out right away in terms of go remote, hybrid, fully back into the office. But I think over time it is great for companies to have an opinion about this. I think that there is no one solve. It's not like everyone should be remote, or everyone should be in the office, or everyone should do 2 days a week. Like we don't know that. Like, there's no single bullet here. But I think it is worthwhile to think through what would make sense for your company. And so, like I mentioned with Shopify, we said, you know what? We're going to reimagine our company to be digital by design, which means it's going to be digital first. There will be offices. We don't know when, and we don't know what we're going to do with them, but there will be offices, and we'll figure that out as it comes. But we made a statement, and we're now redesigning the company to follow along with that statement. And if your company is deciding to go, I think I read something about Netflix saying, we'll probably do a couple days a week in the office. Great, that's an opinion. And then people and candidates and people who work there can decide, what sort of company do I want to work for, and does this factor into my decision making? I think over time you want to do that. At the beginning, it's probably fine to be testing the waters, but in the long term, you don't want to have like, we don't know what we're doing, right? Like right away when Shopify came out with the news, a lot of people texted me. Actually, my friends from Microsoft texted me, goes, oh my God, you're going to be remote. I would never work there. I'm like, well, aren't you working remote until we don't know when? So at least we're embracing the approach, trying to make it work for us, and then figuring out what tools and what procedures we need in order to make it a high fidelity experience. And I agree with Ananta. Actually, one thing that's cool about VR, for those who have not tried it, is that there is a lot of, it does feel like you're with people when you're in VR, especially when you use some of the collaboration tools. Like the one when I was swimming with my direct report, it didn't feel like we were actually together. We were doing something fun though, but I remember it. But in terms of some of these tools, like I'm an investor in a company called Spatial, and actually it feels like you're together. We were high-fiving and hanging out. I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm with my friends and hanging out. And it did like very, very closely approximate being there in real life. So those tools are coming.
Great, thank you so much for that. Let's switch gears to the questions from our participants. There's plenty. We won't have time for everything, but let's take the ones, a couple at least. So, how do you measure morale?
So there's a few different metrics for this, and I mentioned like you do these regular surveys to understand engagement. So the number one thing that you're looking for is engagement. And then another question that we do put in there is, and might be worth figuring out how you want to phrase it, is around burnout. And checking in on those is kind of really important. The other metric that you get handed right away is, which is kind of unfortunate, is like how many people have health issues. You will know that. And similarly, another metric that is an unfortunate one is also attrition. So these are all kind of bad metrics, that negative metrics that kind of like help you measure like, what's actually going down in your morale. But then there's also like positive metrics, like for example, your happiness with tools, or your happiness with your management, or empathy that the management is demonstrating. So how transparent is the questions that you're getting in the AMAs, which I think most companies have like switched to at this point. So you can kind of design a nice survey, and those, and if you keep doing that, like will give you like good idea about what it is.
Yeah, so similar to Lyft, at Shopify, what we've tried to do is make some of the signals that used to be implicit, explicit. So if implicitly you would kind of walk around and determine whether you felt like somebody was low energy or was feeling good or not, we just had to make them more explicit. So we also do surveys. We used to do surveys before, we do them more often now. We also use some tooling around making sure people are taking enough time off and taking vacation. It was something that we used to do before as well, but now we're more explicitly looking and saying, are people taking enough time off? And then when they do take time off, a good check-in would be like, are they actually working? And you can use, you have to be careful, but you can use some ways to determine that, right? Like, are they messaging you a Slack? Did they turn on their out of office on email? Are they still shipping PRs in the code base, right? In which case, maybe they're not taking the time off. But I think it's worth having a conversation. Sometimes people are like, you know what, actually, I'm working on a little side project, and for me, programming is my way of taking time off. It's just not going to be working on the core critical path. And for others, they want to be, you know, I met somebody the other day who was like, they went off the internet for a month, right? This wasn't a Shopify employee, but I was like, they took a month off the internet during the pandemic. And I'm like, what a great way to do a complete reset. And I think that it's really important to have that from yourself, figure out what works for you. And then the last thing is, like, you talk to people, ask people, how's it going? How's your family? How are you feeling? Have you taken a vacation? How are you thinking about the next, quarter? How do you feel about your performance? Like, actually talking to people, and some of it could be also as a socially distant walk.
Mm-hmm. And we talked a lot about, or we mentioned a lot, health. How about mental health? How are you following up on your team's mental health?
Yeah, I think so. That's obviously like got to be a big focus. So what we've done is, like I said, like these surveys tend to be very important, like to figure out like where the team's mental health is, and I actually think it puts a lot more onus on the manager to step up and keep up with like how look at the early indicators, like figure out like where people are going. And I actually think it's really important for people to educate themselves about mental health. So I personally have had to, not had to, but I wanted to learn more about it, like understand like how to think about it, what are the signs that you want to look for. And at Lyft, like we also have given people access to mental health care. There are companies out there that you can get, like, Lyra Health is one, Modern Health. There's like a few such things. And those are very, very useful. And the other one, like we've given people, is like ability to use an app called Headspace, and it's actually one of my favorite apps right now. It's a great way to like practice mindfulness or meditation, and all of these things like come in handy, because basically what you are really trying to solve for here is resilience. You're trying to build resilience. So you cannot really plan for such unprecedented things. There's nothing you can do to plan for it. But what does happen is that, like, initially when things are very, very tough, that when I said the disparity between what is real and like what you wanted is big. So there is a shock. And but then once you kind of keep things a few stable, the current way of doing things becomes a new norm, as long as you kind of pick the right things, like the way many people have done. And then the path to making this new norm is, of course, like there's a few mitigations that like we'll need to figure out. So, so that's basically like a way to kind of also manage mental health, because like you really don't want to like kind of constantly jerk around, and that causes a lot of stress and even more uncertainty on top of everything else.
Yeah, I think so. I like what you said, Ananthan. We do a bunch of those as well. Let's add a couple more that Shopify thinks through. So one is, a lot of what happens in an employee's journey is that they don't feel like they have the right context. And before, if they were in the office getting that context, and now they're moving to digital, and if that context isn't like, I'm not in the right office, or bumping into people in the hallways, I don't overhear things, so they feel more anxiety, like what's happening, am I doing well? So connecting with them is key. But for us, we also moved to like writing more. So now decisions are like writing more things down, even sending asynchronous videos, saying, hey, we did a product review, here's the 10-minute video of our feedback. Help people feel connected, but also to their work, so they can see that they're getting feedback and they're not like in an island all by themselves. I think that was super useful. And then I think making sure that you are tracking these things. Like, if you think that somebody's not having a good time, or you reach out to them and you're not getting responses, like trying to swing the pendulum all the way and over communicate, right? Like a lot of people message me, they're like, oh, I feel like you're over communicating. I'm like, really? Perfect. That means that it's working. right? If you tell me I'm over communicating, probably means it's working because I'm getting across more, I'm trying to connect with people. I would say the last thing we have at Shopify is we have a lot of social channels, like social channels in Slack, for example. And it's great to see people engaging with other Shopify folk and talking about different issues that are not just work. So we have a parenting channel where people can talk about the kids, and we have like fun channels, like talking about different TV shows, and we have one called Battle Stations. You can show off your home office. And so I think that has been amazing too, to see people connecting across the company and having those social conversations in a way that works for them, whether it's video, Slack, going for a walk, etc.
Yeah, and one more thing worth adding here is like, because there's so much negativity when you read the press or like you see the TV, I think it's important to also like highlight wins and bring in joy. So basically, like happy hours and like, make people look forward to new things that are pleasant. So because otherwise like there's too much negativity around.
Good place to end.
Yeah.
And that we're perfectly on time here as well. Thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared. I think your teams are so lucky to have you as leaders. And let's all build a lot of resilience and a lot of joy also from all the wins that we get along the ways.
Thanks for moderating, Natalia.
Yeah, and thank you, Natalia, and as well as Plato.